Evolution is a concept that has permeated virtually all of Western society.
How are many people introduced to it? Evolution and pop culture, today on Creation Magazine Live. Welcome to Creation Magazine Live. My name's Calvin Smith.
And I'm Richard Fangrad.
And this week we're talking about evolution and pop culture.
Yes, what's going on in the world?
Well, you know, the concept of evolution, of course, this is something that all thinking atheists have to accept, right? They have to have a way to explain how they got here without God. And so everything must have created itself, some form of evolution. Now, atheistic writers, they've used that concept in their writings, movies, whatever they are producing to promote their worldview. And that's so common now that this has actually affected the way many people think about evolution, and it's actually contributed to people accepting evolution.
Right, yeah. I mean, you see it everywhere. Video games, movies, TV shows, comic books, video games, novels, they all feature evolution.
Right.
It's taken as a given. And this idea then, that's in so many different avenues of media, it just influences everyone.
Exactly.
Eventually. Yep.
Now, I've often said to people that, you know, evolution actually makes for great fiction.
It does,
right?
Yeah, it's great science
watch
fiction.
Star Trek or Star Wars, whatever, because that's what evolution is. It's fictitious. So it makes for good fantasy and all those things. But, you know, I think the problem for a lot of people is that there's this underpinning of science in a lot of science fiction, and then that sort of somehow gives it credibility in people's eyes.
Yeah, and probably the greatest appeal to of science fiction is the technological benefits that have come from it, and we need to admit that
of course,
people dream up science fiction, and then technology. You kind of have, well, maybe we can make this gadget for real.
Yeah,
and you have solar energy, plastics, tape recorders, liquid fertilizers, microfilm, television, submarines, doors that open by themselves, airplanes, satellites, spaceships. Nuclear energy were all predicted by science fiction, and the latest thing is just recently come out here is you'll have a wristwatch that's a phone. It's like Dick Tracy from the comic books and so on. That's and that all comes from science fiction.
Right, and of course, this idea of using our using technology to benefit us. That's we see that in Genesis 1:28. It's part of the Dominion mandate, where God gave us things that we can use and stuff, but. We do also have to admit that a lot of the science fiction depicts things that are just completely unscientific.
Yes.
In a sense, they have to. I mean, if you're talking about breaking laws of things like thermodynamics, creating some kind of perpetual motion machine, or you're breaking the law of biogenesis, you're creating life from non-life. There's a lot of unscientific things in there too.
Yeah, and it's because of that unscientific element. That the setting for these stories is usually in some far-off world, in a galaxy far, far away, and that kind of thing, or where this anti-science idea can somehow be overcome.
Right, because we don't have to verify it, right? I mean, a lot of the early sci-fi, from the 19th century, these stories took place in places that were relatively unexplored on Earth. Right at the poles, or journey to the center of the Earth, or far off places, because we hadn't really seen those places, so we could imagine that maybe things were happening that weren't really real here in our regular part of the Earth, or whatever. Or
but I mean, how many science fiction stories that portray, for example, life on the moon, like alien life on the moon, took place after the Apollo missions?
Right.
Well, none. Because that was now explored.
Right.
And it's the same thing with Mars. When the Viking probes returned from Mars to reveal what Mars was really like, that there weren't people living there, then the science fiction had to push their stories further off into deep space and so on.
Right, and writers have admitted that they've kind of done that, right?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. We're not complaining about that. But Hal Clement understands the problem, and he said this: the fact is, I like to lay the scenarios of my stories on non-earthly planets of my own devising. We know too much about the planets of our own solar system to let me use them very freely for this purpose, so I have to set up elsewhere. This forces me to assume faster than light travel for many of the stories.
Right. Now, he's a science fiction writer.
Yeah.
Obviously,
Yep.
for science fiction, you've got to have other worlds, other planets.
Right.
We've gone to
Yep.
Mars. We kind of know what's going on there.
Yeah, and now we should make a bit of a disclaimer here. We're not in today's program. We're not trying to beat down anybody's favorite science fiction story of Star Wars or Star Trek. I mean, I was a Star Wars fan. I'm getting out of it now. I'm growing up a little bit, but just a bit of a disclaimer there. Dealing with this issue.
We're not trying to beat up anybody's favorite characters. We're just trying to make the points of how evolution has influenced sci-fi and been accepted.
Right.
And we'll be right back.
Dogs vary greatly in size, from Chihuahua to Great Dane, yet they are all part of the dog or wolf created kind. They can all interbreed. Researchers have found that the small breeds of dog have something in common, a mutation in a gene that codes for an important growth regulator. This prevents the small dogs growing to normal size. Mutations do that sort of thing. They destroy normal biological functions. Some of that destruction might be entertaining for us, producing cute miniature dogs that don't cost much to feed. But mutations won't create the complex blocks of genetic instructions needed to produce the growth regulator in the first place. Evolutionists say that mutations change dinosaurs into birds and apes into people. But how can mutations, which destroy complex information, do that sort of thing? Modern biology really shouts creation, not evolution.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about evolution and pop culture.
Right, yeah. One fact is certain, evolution has permeated sci-fi, the sci-fi genre from the beginning, really, of that genre, giving writers the basis of humanistic themes and that type of thing, and imagining all sorts of strange phenomenon. In his book, A Pictorial History of Science Fiction, author David Kyle wrote, Charles Darwin, grandson of the mighty Erasmus Darwin, was upsetting the world with his evolutionary theories, greatly affecting thoughtful science fiction writers, or greatly influencing science fiction writers.
Right.
That's an interesting quote.
I mean, an interesting statistic is that when we look at the chronology of historically important literature, all right, works of science fiction,
Right, yeah.
from 1817 to 1859, which was the year of Charles Darwin's Origin of Species, there were only 5 significant sci-fi, novels written.
One of them 1859.
Was one of them was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Okay.
But following the publication of Darwin's book, within the same time period, 42 years from 1859 to 1901, there were no less than 26 sci-fi, important sci-fi novels written, and you can just see the influence right there.
Yeah. And 6 of the novels in that list were written by H.G. Wells, a very famous name. He was a political philosopher and sociologist who opposed Christianity. That's not a secret. From the Encyclopedia Britannica, it says this: Wells' influence was enormous, both on his own generation and on that which immediately followed it. None of his contemporaries did more to encourage revolt against Christian tenets and accepted codes of behavior, especially as regards sex, in which both of his books and in his personal life, he was a persistent advocate of almost complete freedom.
Right, and that's right there in the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah.
I mean, but you look into it, it's not really a big surprise because H.G. Wells, he actually studied under Thomas Huxley.
Oh yeah, there's a name we know.
Darwin's bulldog, right? And so throughout his life, he was a firm believer and a promoter of evolutionary philosophy. And regarding his views on the implications of evolution, he actually wrote this: if all the animals and man had been evolved in this ascendant manner, then there had been no first parents, no Eden, and no fall. And if there had been no fall, then the entire historical fabric of Christianity, the story of the first sin, and the reason for an atonement upon which the current teachings based in Christian emotion and morality, it collapsed like a house of cards. So he knew exactly what evolution meant to Christianity.
Right, yeah. Right. His writings naturally reflect his philosophy, his outlook on life, and so on. In the classic Time Machine, for example, the time traveler journeys to the future, the setting in which man has evolved into 2 species, the passive, the childlike Eloi, and the monstrous ape-like Morlocks. The Time Machine was one of the early works of science fiction. It depicts evolution of different life forms on Earth.
Right.
So it's dealing with that.
Yeah.
But evolutionary philosophy also provided the basis for the existence of other life forms, life evolving on other planets.
Right. We evolved here, they evolved there,
Right,
etc. Yeah. And he had, of course, his classic War of the Worlds is a perfect example of this,
Yes.
right? Now, this was actually performed on Halloween on October 30th in 1938. And if you know the story, of course, this caused panic amongst people who were listening to it because they thought it was a real situation that people, creatures from Mars were invading and so on. But again, it's the same concept. Well, we evolved here. God wasn't involved, so life must be evolving out there. They evolve on Mars. They're coming to visit us. That type of thing.
And that whole concept just launched, all kinds of tales of aliens on other worlds, and eventually the most long-lived space opera series, of course, Star Trek.
Right.
And that now Star Trek has been franchised out and all kinds of different things there. Whether you love it or not, it is admittedly extremely popular. It's very popular.
Yeah.
What was the motivation behind the series from the man who invented it?
Well, Gene Roddenberry, American screenwriter and producer, of course, he was an atheist. Believed in evolution.
Yes.
And here's some of the things he said over the years. He said, "We must question the story logic of having an all-knowing, all-powerful God who creates faulty humans and then blames them for his own mistakes." He also said, "For most people, religion is nothing more than a substitute for a malfunctioning brain. If people need religion, ignore them, and maybe they'll ignore you, and you can go on with your life." It wasn't until I was beginning to do Star Trek that the subject of religion arose. What brought it up was that people were saying that I would have to have a chaplain on board the Enterprise, right? It's a military vessel, or whatever.
Okay.
And he replied, "No, we don't." So you can see right from the beginning that whole concept was started by an atheist who'd accepted evolution and developed that
and
whole
he's
concept.
not speaking here in uncertain terms, is he? He's pretty clear about his agenda.
Not at all.
Kind of another thing that surprised me, in 1975, Gene Roddenberry accepted an offer from Paramount to develop Star Trek into a feature film, and we all know the story, the history from that. And so he moved back into his old Paramount lot. Now, his proposed story told of a flying saucer hovering above Earth that was programmed to send down people who looked like prophets, including Jesus Christ. Who or what had programmed the craft was not addressed. Basically, John Pavel says, God was a malfunctioning spaceship. And that's from Gene Roddenberry, the myth behind the man, or the myth and the man behind Star Trek.
Right.
That's a quote from that book.
So that was going to be the plot of the first Star Trek movie.
Yeah.
That got shot down because it was more of a Christian culture back then. It probably would have been rejected, but you can see again this atheistic premise. And anyway, we'll talk more about it when we get back.
Genesis Verse by Verse is a Bible study tool available on CMI's website, designed to help pastors, students, and laymen alike study the book of Genesis like never before. And it's completely free. Simply look up any verse in Genesis 1 to 11 or just scroll down the page. The center column provides links to articles that answer common questions pertaining to that verse and the topics that naturally arise from them. Visit creation.com to use it today.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about evolution and pop culture. And many people, I don't think, seem to realize how much evolutionary rationalism is in so many of these fantasy and pop culture references we see. I mean, think of a list here of movies or things. How about Planet of the Apes? What's the premise? How about Tarzan, the Ape Man, right? Men in Black, King Kong, Jurassic Park, Alien, Star Wars, even some of the commercials you see on TV, right? It's easy enough for a caveman to do it, or Dr. Pepper will have some kind of it's just everywhere.
Yeah, it's everywhere. You mentioned comic books earlier on. Of course, a lot of comic books have been turned into movies recently. In the X-Men series, in the first X-Men movie, it starts off with a black screen, and then you hear Patrick Stewart, who plays Charles Xavier, and he says this: "Mutation, it is the key to our evolution. It has enabled us to evolve from a single-celled organism into the dominant species on this planet. This process is slow, normally taking thousands and thousands of years, but every few hundred millennia, evolution leaps forwards."
Right. Now it's actually a promotion for a specific type of evolution, punctuated equilibrium, where we evolve quick and all that kind of stuff.
Different version of it.
But yeah, I mean, that's the whole premise. You get mutations, you get superpowers. It's the whole concept, right? Now, the problem is of course, we've talked about this many times, is evolution requires new information. If you're going to go from a single-celled organism to a person, you've got to add increased amounts of genetic information that never existed before.
Yeah.
And the proposed mechanism is mutations. But the problem is evolutionists don't even have one smack-down example they can show you of mutation that adds genetic information that never existed for forms, functions, features that we never saw before.
Right. And we've done programs on this before.
Yeah, I mean, even if they could show one example, in order for evolution to be true, it's a statistical argument. You would have had to have it happen billions of times.
There should be lots of examples.
Lots of examples, and we don't have any. So,
but in movies, mutations take on a different character. Like in the X-Men, mutations are a good thing.
Yeah.
They're explained very simplistically. In one of the last movies, the villain wants to have a nuclear war. So that there's more, radiation, the result will be more mutations, as though that's a good thing to make more mutants.
Right. And when you grow up and actually understand what a mutation is, you don't want one. But I mean, one of the characters is actually called Darwin. And again, it's this naive concept of natural selection or evolution. He'll walk over to a
fish tank.
And he sticks his head in the water, and all of a sudden he gets gills. Wow. So he just adapts to whatever he needs.
Yeah.
And sometimes I've actually met evolutionists, many evolutionists understand the theory a little bit better than that, but just average people that think that's kind of the way evolution works. Whatever the creature needs, it just gets in that environment. And it's just a really simplistic explanation of natural selection. But anyway, we've talked about that before. So.
Yeah, so essentially with the X-Men, long eons of time, the evolutionary story and the capabilities of mutations to change people and give them new abilities are all really pushed to make the story credible.
Right, and I can remember being a kid and just the concept of, well, maybe my DNA is special, and maybe I'm going to get a mutation, and maybe it'll be a good thing. But it predisposed me to be positively influenced by evolution.
Yes.
And we'll be back.
At a forum on depression, a young man said, "I think some people may have an inability to cope, and maybe this might sound a bit extreme, but that might be Darwinian theory. The Darwin theory of survival of the fittest. Maybe some of us aren't meant to survive. Maybe some of us are meant to kill ourselves." Now, why did this young man think that human life has such little value? Perhaps he'd heard people like Oxford professor Peter Atkins, who said, "We are just a bit of slime on the planet." Likewise, psychologist Susan Blackmore said, "If you really think about evolution and why we human beings are here, you have to come to the conclusion that we're here for absolutely no reason at all." What a stark contrast to the words of Jesus, who said, "I have come that they may have life and have it to the full."
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
We're talking about evolution and pop culture and mutations and that kind of thing. Now, you just mentioned that you kind of thought that might be interesting if you have some special mutations that gives you powers when you're...
If evolution was true, which was what I was being taught as fact, then maybe I had some mutations, or maybe I was going to be better than some other people, right?
Yeah,
Isn't that the concept of a superhero?
And that's nice to play that way and to kind of in a science fiction world. But when it crosses over, and it had those kinds of ideas have crossed over into the real world.
Of some people being superior to others because they're more evolved.
Yes, yeah. For example, Pekka Aaron Anuven here, a young man who went on a shooting spree. He said this: "I cannot say that I am of the same race as this miserable, arrogant, selfish human race. No, I have evolved a step higher. I am a cynical existentialist, anti-human humanist, anti-social social Darwinist, realistic idealist, and godlike atheist." He went on to say, "Life is just a coincidence, a result of long process evolution. Human life is not sacred. Humans are just a species among other animals. Death is not a tragedy. Not all human lives are important or worth saving."
Right. Now this young man accepted what he got taught. And now this was from a YouTube rant. He actually did this YouTube video before he went out and killed all these people. But look what he accepted. He accepted, okay, we've evolved, life isn't sacred, and he thought that he was more advanced as an atheist than people who
Yes.
believed in God.
Yep.
You know, so I mean, it's interesting though, because even people like Richard Dawkins,
Yes,
right?
a famous atheist.
Famous
yeah.
atheist. He calls himself a bright because he believes he's an atheist. So
Yeah.
well, what does that mean to anybody who's an atheist? Well, they're dim or
We're,
something.
we're the dimwits, right?
Yeah, you know. So anyway, I mean, this whole concept of all sorts of different fantasy genres. For example, we've looked at books and comic books and movies and stuff. But how
Right.
about the video game market? That's huge.
Yeah, it's huge.
Absolutely huge. So
Yeah, there's a game called Spore.
yeah.
And this is a game created by Sims designer Will Wright. And it allows players to sort of mimic evolution,
Right.
to grow their own little microbes and then guide them through various levels of development and civilization and so on.
Yeah.
And this cartoonish sort of game attracted the attention of the ardently pro-evolution Scientific American and National Geographic Channel.
Yeah.
And they later aired a documentary about this game. And the creator who discusses the background behind the philosophy behind this game.
Right. So you have Scientific American, which would be considered a very, upright scientific, but they're
Right.
looking at this game
And a
as,
computer game.
well, let's promote this because
Yep.
it promotes evolution, right? I mean, a Spore starts off with this meteorite. It crashes into a planet and it fills the oceans with microbial life, right? I mean, even right there, that's not science. This is overlooking huge problems with chemical evolution of first life in the first place. As well, there's all sorts of experiments that have been done that showed if there were germs on meteorites coming in, they'd get fried upon entry into Earth's atmosphere and all these sorts of things. But people just accept it. I mean, it's just a game, and
Yeah, and there's concepts behind it yet.
Yeah.
Players modify this creature then, and as the creature creator, they sort of guide it through several life stages, and gradually the creature grows and moves from sea to land, mimicking the evolutionary process.
Right.
And then eventually you're off to conquering other worlds once you get smart enough and that kind of thing. So,
Right. And a lot of people will say, look, this is just a game, and I understand. People play games and they're not always influenced by what they... But the fellow who created the game, Will Wright, he said he himself sees Spore as more than just a game. And he said in a video where he's presenting the game, he actually said this: the games that I do, I really think of them as more as modern story toys. And I really kind of want them to be presented in a way to where kids can explore and discover their own principles. I mean, he knows it can be used as more as a game because it's actually teaching evolution, right?
Yeah.
Now, and he cites SETI, search for extraterrestrial intelligence, right? And astrobiology, the science of studying life in outer space, which we don't have any.
Yeah,
But anyway,
interesting terminology
Yeah,
there.
it's one of his inspirations, and he says, that Spore is meant to be a philosophy toy. It's supposed to inspire philosophical questions. And he acknowledges that aspects of the game are very Darwinian. And, so you can see this influence. He understands the implications of presenting ideas that influence people towards his worldview. Right? And we'll have more when we're back.
Creation Ministries International focuses on the Bible's first book, Genesis, and the creation evolution issue. Many of our speakers are scientists with PhDs who, before joining CMI, were employed in various scientific fields. Creation Ministries speakers go to churches, equipping and encouraging people with the message of the truth and authority of the Bible and its relevance to the real world. To locate upcoming CMI events or inquire about booking a speaker into your church, visit creation.com.
Well, welcome back to Creation Magazine Live. We're in the news section here.
Yes.
And so we're actually going to look at an article. I mean, oftentimes articles that we have in Creation Magazine were from a news story, a news item that we've kind of picked up and that relate to the creation evolution issue. And
new
to
scientific
do
discovery or some other odd bit of news, as the case might be today.
That's right. And this is from an older Creation Magazine from December 2003, but it was called Saltwater Platypus Surprise. So I'm just going to start reading here, and I think people will catch on. This is by David Catchpool from Australia. He said, on the windswept ocean beaches of Kangaroo Island off the southern coast of the Australian mainland, it was just another ordinary day. The island is renowned as a place where you can get close to local fauna such as seals, kangaroos, and koalas. Some international tourists aimed their video camera at one of Australia's most famous native animals as it emerged from the sea and made its way up the sandy beach. And if you have that copy of Creation Magazine, there's actually a picture of that occurring in there. And yes, the creature certainly matched the well-known descriptions of which had for so long intrigued skeptical biologists. Fur-like velvet, a beaver-like tail, a bill that looked like a duck's, and clawed feet useful for digging. The tourists were delighted and excited to be able to see for themselves a real live platypus in its natural habitat.
Natural habitat, yeah, that's the story so far. It continues this way. Or was it? In the wild, certainly, but was this platypus really in its natural habitat? Accompanying the tourists on the beach at the time was their Australian tour guide. In stark contrast to the visitors from overseas, Wild Camp Adventures tour guide Ben Combridge was dumbfounded to see this platypus come to the shore, riding in on a small wave, it says, and paddle up the beach. While tourists were excited to experience what they thought was a standard encounter with local wildlife, the Australian knew better.
Yeah.
As he told a news reporter, I was like, that's not meant to be here. Indeed, as an Australian myself, this is David Catchpool, the author here writing, I was always taught that platypuses live in fresh water, not seawater, and are most usually found in mountain streams and creeks in eastern Australia, nowhere near a seashore environment. But when biologists heard of the seashore encounter with a Kangaroo Island platypus, their comments indicated that the platypus is a species that scientists still know little about. When you think you know what they're doing, they do something different, said one platypus expert, describing this latest observation as incredible. Another expert who has successfully bred platypuses in captivity for more than 10 years, Dr. John Wamsley, was just as candid. He said, I've never known of them going into salty water, he said. Whether they can survive in salt water or not, I haven't got a clue.
Right. So, I mean, this is kind of interesting. Actually, when I was in Australia, this was the only animal I didn't get to see. Out of all the Australian animals, you know, we went down to this water hole. It was a freshwater water hole, by the way, but, you know, you're trying to catch a glimpse.
The
never...
platypus, sure, yeah.
They're so cool, right?
Yeah.
But, I mean, what's this article really saying? Look, there are experts, there are scientists that have dedicated their life to studying the platypus.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm a world's leading expert on platypus. And guess what? You might think you know a lot as a scientist, and you might make claims and make bold statements. And again, I think it just goes to show Christians, wait a sec. If you've been told something is a fact and it absolutely happens this way, and because you know you've got an expert there, maybe God knows something that people don't. Anyway, we'll end with that. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.